Look, we heard from so many people, right? Families of the deceased, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, Texas Rangers, hunters, Border Patrol, and responsible gun owners who won't give up their Second Amendment right to bear arms. And you know what they all said? We want secure and safe schools, and we want gun laws that won't make it so easy for the bad guys to get these damn guns. So, we know it's on the table. We need to invest in mental health care. We need safer schools. We need to restrain sensationalized media coverage. We need to restore our family values. We need to restore our American values. And we need responsible gun ownership. Responsible gun ownership. We need background checks. We need to raise the minimum age to purchase an AR-15 rifle to 21. We need a waiting period for those rifles. We need red flag laws and consequences for those who abuse them. These are reasonable, practical, tactical regulations to our nation, states, communities, schools, and homes. Responsible gun owners are fed up with the Second Amendment being abused and hijacked by some deranged individuals.
The argument for the Second Amendment continues onward as we enter 2022 on a hot note. This recent spike of mass shootings in the last 20 years, in which mass shootings are defined where an individual shoots 3 or 4 more people in a single setting. Proponents of the left have continued to hotly debate the issue of gun regulation and weapons of war. For the right, it basically comes down to the protection of the Second Amendment and more guns in areas where there is no security. The realistic approach is that both sides have managed to hijack the Second Amendment, as Michael McConaughey has alluded to. But having an actor on stage, particularly in a city where the most recent egregious mass shooting happened in Uvalde, Texas, isn't going to facilitate honest debate about what needs to happen in this country. One is a misunderstanding by the American populace about the Second Amendment. 2, the more pressing issue that the federal government is basically telling the citizenry that they need more gun regulation. And if so, maybe even a ban on certain weapons. In this audio, I'm going to explain first the definition of the Second Amendment, and 2, why we should not trust the federal government at all, much less for anything, but particularly on this issue. And I will give you my reasons. But the definition of the Second Amendment is to the United States Constitution, which it protects the right to keep and bear arms, in which it was ratified on December 15th, 1791, along with 9 other articles of the Bill of Rights. In the District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008, the Supreme Court affirmed for the first time that the rights belong to individuals for self-defense in the home. And it's important to note that there is no misidentification or misinterpreting the definitions here. And it also goes on to say that the Supreme Court of Columbia versus Heller, which affirmed for the first time that the rights belong to individuals for self-defense in the home, They also included that the right is not limited or unlimited. The right is not unlimited. It does not preclude. These are key words here. The existence of certain long-standing prohibitions, such as those forbidding the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or restrictions on the carrying of dangerous and unusual weapons. I'm going to put the links in the articles that I'm reading from, as well as documentation for you to read, so that you can have an understanding of exactly what is being read to you here. And well, I mean, if what you're not going to get from either proponent of the left and right today is an honest accounting of that which is being hotly debated. Now, for a little bit of history on the Second Amendment, it was based primarily, partially on the right to keep and bear arms in English common law. And it was influenced by the English Bill of Rights of 1689, in which Sir William Blackstone described this right as an auxiliary right, supporting the natural rights of self-defense and resistance to oppression. Oppression by who? Well, foreign and domestic. It also goes on to say, in the civic duty to aid in concert in defense of the state. From who? The federal government. Do you think they would know something about tyranny? Why the free states fought against the monarchy? It also goes on to say, any labels of rights as auxiliary must be viewed in the context of the inherent purpose of a Bill of Rights, which is to empower a group with the ability to achieve a mutually desired outcome and not to necessarily enumerate or rank the importance of rights. Now, both James Monroe and John Adams, who supported the Constitution being ratified, one of the most influential framers of the Constitution is James Madison, in which in Federalist number 46, which is an essay by James Madison of the Federalist Papers, which was published on January 29th, 1788. Madison wrote how a federal army could be kept in check by state militias, in which he says a standing army would be opposed by a militia. And that even Madison argues that it would be able to repel the danger of a federal army. It may well be doubted whether a militia thus circumstanced could ever be conquered by such a proportion of regular troops. This is key. And what Madison is telling you, what other co-signers of the Constitution are telling you, is that this has nothing to do with a limitation of weapons or how the weapon is used. That the free rights of the state are protected from the tyranny of the federal government. Now, I bet you your bottom dollar that there are people on the left, okay, who would agree that we have a tyrannical government, but to them, it's halfway. Yes, it's tyrannical, according to the left, it's only tyrannical when somebody from the Republican Party is in office. Now, to the right, the only tyrannical government that exists is when a Democratic electee is in office. They'll never implicate their own party. And this dominates the political spectrum of today. And there are millions of people who adhere to these political affiliations. But they can never, ever bring about that the federal government as a whole is not based on left and right principles. It's based on affluence. Oh, sure, they'll argue about certain disagreements when it comes to you, the citizen, regarding, say, education, or say healthcare, or Social Security. But when it comes to the Pentagon Budget Account Office, when it comes to Israel, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, when it comes to U.S. interests, when it comes to private military contractors in the military, in the fossil fuel industry, well, there's no left and right. They all act in accordance. Why? That's where the money is. While they drain you of your cash. You want to trust these people? I don't. And so the Constitution was influenced by the English Bill of Rights of 1689, which I'm going to link in the description for you to read. A general overview anyway. And what it means is that in the pre-Constitution, the Protestants' right to bear arms, even in English history, is regarded by English common law as a subordinate auxiliary right of the primary rights to personal security, personal liberty, and private property. And according to Sir William Blackstone, an English jurist who wrote the commentaries on the laws of England, he wrote, quote, "The last auxiliary right of the subject is that of having arms for the defense suitable to their condition and degree, and such as are allowed by law, which is declared by statute, and is indeed a public allowance under due restrictions of the natural right of resistance and self-preservation, when the sanctions of society and laws are found insufficient to restrain the violence of oppression," end quote. So who is he talking about? Is he talking about your average common citizen? No, he's talking about oppression that's coming from an equal power to an armed citizenry. That's the government who's using the military against its citizens. And the English Bill of Rights of 1689 emerged from a tempestuous period in English politics during which there were two issues that were major sources of conflict: the authority of the king to govern without the consent of Parliament, that's one, and the role of Catholics in a country that was becoming ever more Protestant, that's two. Now, the text of the English Bill of Rights of 1689 includes language protecting the rights of the Protestants against disarmament by the crown. And that's where the Constitution comes. It follows through with that, and especially the Second Amendment. In which it quotes, quote, "that the subjects which are Protestants may have arms for the defense suitable to their conditions and as allowed by law," end quote. So there you have it. That's where the Constitution got its influence from. And then, come on, at this point, there's little doubt that the co-signers of the Second Amendment were heavily influenced by the English Bill of Rights. And I mean, it's only a matter of interpretation as to whether they were intent on preserving the power to regulate arms to the states over the federal government, or whether it was intent on creating a new right akin to the rights of others written in the Constitution. Now, the settlers in colonial America viewed the right to arms and the right to bear arms and or state militias as important for one or more of these purposes, which was enabling the people to organize a militia system, or participating in law enforcement, or safeguarding against tyrannical governments, repelling invasion, or just facilitating a natural right of self-defense. I mean, what happened? Well, in 1903, we had legislation that was enacted, which was called the Militia Act of 1903, or otherwise known as the Dick Act. In which during the 19th century, the militia in each U.S. state and territory operated under the Militia Acts of 1792, which was extended by the Militia Act of 1795. The Secretary of War in the United States, Eli Harut, who worked as a Reform Army officer after the Spanish-American War, in which Dick championed the Militia Act of 1903 and became known as the Dick Act, which repealed, the Militia Acts of 1795 and designated the militia as two classes. The reserve militia, which included all able-bodied men between ages 17 and 45, and the organized militia comprising state militia, National Guard, as they're later called, receiving federal support. So that means the free citizens are no longer militia, outlawed it. And this is where the regulation of weapons happens. It doesn't happen overnight, it happens over time. Because the government wants control of its people. We are the final enemy. You know, the problem with a lot of these people of the left and right is that they have total faith in their government. Well, need I remind you that after the invasion of Iraq in 2003, according to the ORB International, which is an independent polling agency located in London, they report that over 1.2 million deaths are estimated. The federal government created a lie suggesting that Al-Qaeda and Iraq were commiserating with each other in procuring chemical and biological weapons. This was false. But it wasn't enough to stop the war from continuing on. And after 10 years, the federal government, using the military, killed 1.2 million people. Now, we had a lot of people who protested this war here in the United States and even around the world. But nothing ever happened to stop it. As for the Syrian war, under the Obama administration, the estimates of the total number of deaths by the United Nations and Arab League envoy to Syria estimate that anywhere between 500,000 to 610,000 people are dead as of March 2022, based on 11 years since the Civil War or the Arab Spring happened, in which the United States became part of. In fact, in 2011, CIA Director David Petraeus brought to President Obama a document called Operation Timber Sycamore, which was to have or to allow funding and training of Syrian jihadists. That means terrorists. Well, the government calls them rebels. And in this document, they're called rebels, where it was authorized and influenced by Jordan and Israel to help train and fund these jihadist groups to help overthrow the democratically elected President Bashar al-Assad, suggesting that he's a dictator, just like Saddam, and needs to be ousted forcibly with the help of the US government. This was a covert operation. At the same time, Obama told the American people that we were fighting the war on terror. Meanwhile, he's funding it. And because of that, 500,000 people are dead, and maybe even more. In 2011, we had the first Libyan civil war, in which the United States became a part of, thanks to Hillary Clinton, then the Secretary of State under the Obama administration, in which I must say, this is the war that Obama did not want. This actually was a war pressed by Hillary Clinton, Samantha Powers, and Susan Rice, in which it was an armed conflict in the North African part of the country, which was fought between the forces loyal to Muammar Gaddafi, the president, and rebel groups, in other words, terrorists that were seeking to oust the government. Many millions of dollars went to these terrorist groups and also forces that were opposing Gaddafi, such as the National Transitional Council. The United Nations, well, NATO anyway, the North Atlantic Transnational Organization, in the 10 years that they've been around in Libya, which led coalition dropping the first bombs targeting Gaddafi, in which he later died, killing tens of thousands. And with Gaddafi, anti-Gaddafi forces and these Libyan terrorists fighting for control of small acres of land, what happened is this once prosperous African country is now an open-air slave market. And if the United States were part of the Rome Statutes, which is the Hague International Courts, Hillary Clinton, Obama, George Bush Jr., Donald Trump, and Joe Biden would be facing war crimes, crimes of aggression, and crimes against humanity for their involvement. And that includes NATO. And of course, the continued bombardment of Yemen. According to the United Nations, the war in Yemen has killed 377,000 people by the end of 2021, in which 3/4 of those deaths were the direct result of the armed conflict. Now, you are going to say, well, how is the United States involved? We're not there. The United States, under Trump and under Biden and Obama, have given military aid to Saudi Arabia. That's right. The same country that helped to give 15 of the 19 hijackers involved with the September 11th, 2001 attacks, in which the State Department continues to cover up. Also, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, a U.S. journalist, in which the United States continues to cover up. And here we have the largest humanitarian crisis in the world currently, in which, along with the 377,000 people killed, 1.2 million people are displaced. There are 6 million displaced in Syria. Over 700,000 to 1 million are displaced in Libya. And you wonder why there's a refugee crisis in Europe. But you could thank the federal government. This is what they've done. And I don't see the left, and I don't see the right, and I don't see Matthew McConaughey or any other Hollywood or celebrity basically talking about the crimes of the federal government, which are innumerous. Just Iraq alone, in which they killed over 1 million people, that's more than any mass shooting of the last 200 years in the United States. So you wonder why there's a discrepancy regarding these debates. They're not talking, they don't care about human rights, all the crocodile tears of what happened at Uvalde or what happened at Parkland. As tragic as that is, these people that cry for those children don't cry for the children in Yemen. They never cry for the children in Iraq. They never cry for the children in Syria, and never cry for the children in Libya, and never ask the federal government to disarm. This is the reason why that we have arms in this country and why I support it. For as long as we have a military, they answer to the federal government, which is, by what I've read to you, is tyrannical, genocidal, sociopathic. I support the rights of the free citizens of this country to have the necessary weapons to repel an invasion if there was one. The reason why it hasn't happened is because we have an armed populace. Do you really trust your law enforcement to protect you? Do you really trust these so-called militias, which aren't militias, hiding out in the woods in Michigan and New York to protect you? It's going to be left up to us. And unless we start acting as a unit instead of this divisiveness along political or religious or sexist or racial lines, which are meant to divide us in the first place and keep us fighting each other, the enemy, which you helped to elect, will one day visit their tyrannical agendas on you.